Hello, everyone, wherever you are in the big wide world. My name is Stephen Drew, and I have a fantastic guest with me here today virtually. Although I have met this guest in person as well, and we will do some in-person events, I'm sure, at some point. But let me tell you all about today. So I'm joined here by the fantastic Marsha Ramroop. Marsha is the founder and consultant at Unheard Voice Consultancies. But you might also have seen Marsha around and present in the architecture scene, because Marsha has been quite important as Director of Inclusion at the RABA and part of that big change. So Marsha, I'm super excited to have you here. How are you?
I'm okay. It's like, oh, thank you so much. I can't tell you how excited I am to speak to you in this space, in your special architectural social space. And it's just, I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. And yeah, how am I feeling? I'm good. I'm really good. I'm excited. It's a transitionary period is always like a little bit scary, isn't it? And I've got this posted actually up on my wall. I just glanced up and I've seen it. I've posters all over my office. And this one says, transformational change, counterintuitive decisions, let go of the past to embrace the next stage like a trapeze artist.
Oh,
And it very much feels like that. I'm letting go. I'm swinging through the air. From one sort of swinging bridge to the next, and just grabbing hold. But I just haven't quite grabbed hold of the trapeze just yet. So that's how I feel. Excited, scared, but got to have confidence in my own abilities. Yeah, that's a really long answer to your really simple question. But there's a theme coming up. 9 answers to simple questions.
I love it. Well, it's quite interesting. So I've been lucky because we actually met. I think we met one or two times at the RABA. And what's quite important, when I joined the RABA Council, one of the things I did was I joined your course. Oh, well, I joined, well, you taught me things that I didn't really know, and you made me scratch my brain and think of maybe some biases that even I have, which were deep in me, and I didn't realize were there. And ever since, I've been itching to kind of thrash out this topic. And I hope you don't mind me saying, Marsha, because I was slightly naive on these certain parts which are really important. Now, in terms of your job title of director, I should say. It's one of them days, isn't it? One of them, the brain's going, you're a director of inclusion. And that can mean a lot to a lot of different people. But what was important is you taught me as well, CQ, which I had no idea what that was. But maybe what would be awesome is if people haven't seen you, Marsha, and they're not familiar with where you are currently setting up your new awesome business, and they haven't been aware of stuff's going on. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in the construction sector and the RABA when it comes to inclusivity, and maybe that will inform people then why you were training me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm happy to go right back to the beginning. There's long answers to simple questions. I remember seeing the job ad actually for the Director of Inclusion role at the RIBA. And there was a light behind my eyes, and I just thought, yeah, I've got to do that. And I'll tell you why I felt that I had to do that. My sort of reason for my purpose in life, I really feel, is about creating an inclusive society.
Right.
And when I saw the role at the RIBA, I really believe, and I still do, that working in architecture, built environment, the architectural space, if I could help influence the creation of inclusive spaces, then I could influence the creation of an inclusive society and ultimately an inclusive world. And so it was very much going into this this environment with the idea that I can really help shape people's behaviors, thoughts, actions, deeds, so that we can together create an inclusive world, because an inclusive world is a brilliant one in which we can all thrive. And I always say as well that it's inclusion for all, otherwise it's not inclusion at all. And so, until everyone's included, nobody is. And so when I got this role, I was really clear about what I would do and why I would do it. And my foundational sort of principle and area of expertise is CQ, cultural intelligence. Now, cultural intelligence is, and the CQ, Q stands for quotient because it's a measure as well as the skill. So anyone who involves themselves with in CQ with me does like an assessment, and it gives you a series of numbers, and the numbers are somewhat meaningless, but it does help you understand where you are in order to help pinpoint where you can be in terms of your inclusive behaviors. Because what cultural intelligence actually is the behavioral principle, which is the capability to work and relate effectively with people who are different from you. Now, it's been proven, so there's 20 years of academic peer-reviewed research behind this idea of CQ.
Right.
Which is the research question behind it, which has now been asked of 250,000 people across 170 countries. What's the difference between those that succeed in today's multicultural, globalized world and those that fail? What's the difference between success and failure when working and relating with those who are different from you? And the answer keeps coming back, that you need to have 4 capabilities. The first is CQ drive, motivation. Do you actually want to work and relate effectively with those who are different from you? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail in a bit. CQ knowledge, what do you know? What do you need to know? Not just about other lived experiences, but other values and norms and belief systems, about leadership styles, languages, but also, organizations, so how the REBA might work with architecture social, for example, different organizational cultures there. So understanding that is part of CQ knowledge, and it's such a big piece that you can never know everything about everyone and everything about everything. So I always say that's why it's so important, not only to surround yourself with a diversity of lived experience, but to listen to those voices very different from your own. And then the third piece of the puzzle, I always say, is the most important, because if you're motivated and you have some knowledge and you go straight into action without stopping to think about what you're thinking about, to check your assumptions, to plan your interactions, you'll act, you'll lead, you'll write policy that's tokenistic and stereotypical. So CQ strategy, the third piece of the puzzle, is also about being hugely self-aware as an individual and as an organization. And what are you bringing to the party, essentially, and navigating that effectively to manage your bias. And then the fourth piece of the puzzle, CQ action. People judge us on our behaviors, and so being hugely adaptive is what CQ action's about. So it's what I call an introspective piece of work. It asks, what is it about me that needs to change, so I can be more effective at working and relating with you? And it's not looking at race over here and gender over there and disability over here. It's an overarching principle, and an underpinning perspective to help shape how we manage different lived experiences and diversity. So it very much is at the vanguard of EDI, diversity, inclusion, change. You don't often hear this conversation. When you hear people talk about diversity inclusion, you often hear about race awareness. If you're lucky, you'll hear about disability. If you're really lucky, you'll hear about age. But none of that helps when you have a set of policies. Everyone knows what a good policy around gender pay gap looks like, for example, or inclusive recruitment. But if you don't have the behaviours
Mm.
that are going to change and manage your bias, which is what is creating underrepresentation and discrimination in the first place, then how are you going to be successful? You have to start by looking in the mirror and saying, what is it about me? What is it about my team? What is it about my practice? What is it about my organization? What is it about my sector that needs to change so I can be more effective at working and relating with you and ultimately create those inclusive spaces that our society deserves? And so that's what I was trying to teach you, Stephen.
Yeah, it was amazing. Well, that's why I was quite shocked, because actually I was shocked and it kind of made sense because, as you say, and I like that analogy that you use. It's kind of like the core bits underneath. So, because I went into it from, as you said, because I do a lot of work, and my background has been in recruitment. So, and I've worked in an architecture practice, and it's, while these are all important topics, as you say, it's kind of like the magic bit behind everything, because there's no point saying we're, inclusive if you don't really explore what that means. And as you said, CQ, I thought it was extremely eye-opening. So, for example, and I hope you don't mind me saying this because I'm allowed to talk about myself openly on the training, but I was amazed because in terms of the CQ, one of the questions and partly the tasks that you put forward, Marsha, is to talk about how competitive you think. And I thought at first, CQ, yeah, I'm going to be great because in my head, I don't think I have any biases. But then it was really interesting, even the fact that I viewed myself as highly competitive, and I saw absolutely no shame in that. In one sense, in certain parts and certain cultures, that's not viewed as a positive thing. So I thought, working hard, this entrenched in architecture, we're going to be working hard and all this stuff, and, that no shame in that, and keeping going. Well, actually, kudos to you in that sense, but have you thought about it from other perspectives with other cultures maybe don't share those values? And it completely blew my mind, that little bit, because I think it's because I held it so precious to me as like a pride. And then when suddenly that notion of something which I put so much pride in might not be viewed the same, it really challenged one of my core beliefs. So I have taken that away from the training, and I always remember that bit. But is that a common thing then you see, Marsha, when people go into CQ? It actually challenges people in different ways that they haven't thought before.
Absolutely, because the nature of CQ, I always say the language of CQ is not confrontational, but the level of introspection required can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And essentially is about holding up a mirror to yourself. No one wants to believe that there's something about themselves that needs to change.
Yeah.
Actually, yes, this isn't about changing yourself.
Yeah.
It's about understanding who you are, and that
Mm.
actually other people are different, and that the way that you think and behave and act is not, the be all and end all. There are other ways of doing things.
Yeah.
So the analogy I like to use, I like to pick up a coin, and I tend to have a 10p coin on my desk purely for this purpose, is to say, when you look at a coin sort of face down, it's a circle. But if you look at it from the side, it's a line.
Right.
And actually, if you realize that sometimes you're having a discussion with someone and you think that they're right and you're wrong, or vice versa, you're right and they're wrong, but actually you're both looking at the same thing. It's just one of you seeing circle and the other one is seeing line. And if you just move just slightly, then you'll both see that you're looking at the same thing, just from different perspectives. And that if you just start to make that shift, you have the potential to build a bridge and come to a place of collaboration and understanding, even if you can't reach acceptance, that actually we're just different. That is all that it is. And this isn't necessarily about right and wrong. So your competitive nature is not, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just understanding that some people just don't approach things in that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just different. And other people just achieve results in a different way. And so, yeah, those light bulb moments, I love them. I love them because it's an understanding that actually whatever you believe to be true, coming to the place where you understand that the opposite may also be true is just, that's the key learning that helps us to be more effective at working and relating with those who are different from us. And that difference isn't just about, skin color, and it isn't just about nationality, and it isn't just about faith. It is just about any kind of difference. So, I talked about languages earlier and the difference in languages. That's the language of architecture compared with the language of, graphic design even. So it's just understanding that we actually need to be humble in the way that we approach understanding others, not from a place of ego, and acknowledging, and this is the hardest thing as well. I think this is all to do with, our society and the way, our society is idealized, that we kind of have to step back from self and realize that we can make mistakes, and how we manage those mistakes is just all part of the CQ piece and moving forward effectively. So yeah, if people reach those light bulb moments, I'm delighted.
That makes complete sense. Now, there's probably a lot of listeners, and this would be me a year ago, where initially this idea of CQ, you might feel a bit of resistance, like, oh gosh, it's another thing we need to do, or what have you. And I think it's interesting you mentioned there's a certain uncomfortableness you have to push back, but I can imagine there's lots of massive tangible benefits of get a business, or an architecture business in particular, because we're in the construction industry. Once you start embracing CQ and addressing things, it would be really interesting, Marsha, if without any specific details of business, have you seen, once people kind of get into the nitty gritty of what CQ is, then that actually helps the business overcome a problem that maybe they've had for years, but they haven't addressed or known how? I mean, it'd be really good if you can illustrate what CQ is in the practical sense in a business.
So I'm not an expert in architecture. I'm not an expert in anything other than CQ, really, in broadcasting. I hope I'm a broadcasting expert after 30 years in business as well. And what CQ is, it's a skill to help you do your job better.
Right.
So if, for example, you consider that, like, we have reports going back decades now, saying that if you are embracing of diversity, and where diversity is simply the mix of visible and invisible difference, and you have a culture of inclusion, then your people, your staff, your organization will be hugely engaged.
Yeah. And
the outcomes from that are 8 times more innovative, 6 times better business outcomes. Financial profits are, threefold, fourfold.
Yeah.
So all the evidence is there that I don't. But it takes time to get there. What I would say is that what CQ helps you do is break down the barriers that create discrimination and underrepresentation in the first place, which are preventing you from having a truly diverse workforce, a truly included workforce where they're retained and progressed and, feel happy and included in the business. There's a huge element of inclusion in terms of the way you create your products and services in architecture and the built environment as well. So having the right lens to put on that work, as well as how you're inclusive and your behaviors being inclusive, and how you engage your clients and other external stakeholders like councils or other procurement partners.
Mm.
So you have to apply that lens. Like I say, I literally sometimes pick up these invisible goggles and I place them over the eyes and say, put on your CQ lens to do your job. But it is about being thoughtful, because I've got so many statistics I could throw at you, Stephen. But the one I'm going to use right now is we have, so this guy, Professor Timothy Wilson, he wrote a book called Stranger to Ourselves, Discovering the Adaptive Unconscious. And he was the first person to pull together various studies, psychological studies, that showed that we have 11 million pieces of information that our brain is processing at any given moment, and the conscious capacity to process just 40. So at any given moment, if you have all that access to all 5 senses, your brain is unconsciously processing 10,999,960 bits of information, of which you're completely unaware. So that means that you have to shortcut information. You have to process information really quickly. And so that's the root of bias. Now, some biases are useful and are helpful, and they're there to protect us and keep us safe. And others, really not helpful at all, really create issues for us.
Yeah.
And so being able to slow down and navigate that is what CQ helps us to do. It helps us to create procedural changes to mitigate the impact of hidden bias. And when hidden bias is creating an environment where your practice, your firm, your organization has underrepresentation, has discriminatory outcomes, then you need something to help you slow down and do things differently. And that's what the CQ framework is proven to help do. Now, in terms of outcomes, I've got pages and pages and pages of feedback from people who, and it comes down to individuals saying, I'm going to behave differently, and I've seen the benefit to the business of doing so. And it's just about it. And it varies, that feedback, in terms of, is somebody working in communications? Is someone working in member services? Is someone working in design? And lots of different people have had the same experience of where they have taken the time to slow down and think, who's not in the room? What voice do I need to be listening to? How do I listen to that voice effectively? And how do I behave differently? It's all part of that piece. And that's what you want when you want to be effective, inclusive architects and practitioners in the built environment.
Well said. Well said. I think that the architecture is notoriously hard to study. It's a difficult profession. There's lots of stuff going on. And I always find it interesting, Marsha, that, it takes 7 years to qualify. You learn about the buildings, you learn about how to do all these situations. And it's quite understandable for any businesses out there, when you've been focusing on that for a while. There's so many facets going on, running an office, running a practice, getting the legal frameworks right. So as we know in the RBA, making sure that the public indemnity insurance is there. And there's so much of this going on. But what I find really important, if I put my recruitment hat on this, I hear every day reasons why people are moving away from companies, as well as why people want to stay. And actually, the kind of the themes of what you're talking about and the tangible benefits which comes from CQ and understanding how CQ feeds into equality, inclusivity, as you said, accessibility is really interesting, because actually, as you're right, in a business sense, if people feel they are really valued where they work, they're excited to come to work, and they don't encounter any biases, then naturally they're going to stay longer, which in terms of business output makes a lot of sense. You retaining your staff and people's worker optimum because they enjoy where they work. There's one quick story I have where, because I'm involved with the Architects Benevolent Society, and I was lucky where a director of, I think it wasn't even called CQ or inclusion, it was a director of happiness, a lady at Stride Treglown. She joined because, like yourself, she's really talented and thought, right, where can I make a difference? And construction and architecture is notoriously one of the ones a bit behind, right? That's what her impression was, doing some studies. So she came to this conclusion, and she said, I want to work at Stride Treglown. If you let me there, I'm going to do all this stuff. I want to change these certain things. And initially, this director, she found a bit of resistance, because it was uncomfortable. Someone coming in and saying, you need to change this and do that, especially if the business has been doing certain things, Marsha, for 10, 20 years. They're going to be like, what are you on about? We've been doing this for ages. And anyways, long story short, over time, she implemented procedures. She talked to people how they feel, started understanding people, really learning about their work, getting people involved, mixing teams up, being slightly more flexible, all these things. And I forget there's like a million different facets, being embracing different aspects of everything. And in the end, what was interesting is that there was much less sick days in the team. People enjoyed coming to work. They stayed on average a year longer, or 2 years, than the retention rate. So the retention rate is the average of the length of employment. And in the end, once they got past the resistance, that's why one of Stride Treglown is one of the best employers, and people queue to work there. And you can call it happiness, but in essence, director of happiness, I see there's a lot of parallels with what you do. So getting past that uncomfortableness, tangible outcomes which help the business, but more, what's cooler than everything, this is what we kind of need to push architecture and construction up, I think, Marsha. Get that final bit. It's not, as you said, it's not just about the gender pay gap. It's about why we've had that there, and what are we doing to move things on, and how are we looking at really removing those biases, understanding why. It's not like just putting an extra grand and moving on. It's about looking deep into the fabric of the company, right? And engineering those things. So I digress out of excitement, and I'll put my bell there to stop me talking. But I think it's so needed. I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on my little Stride Treglown story.
Amazing. And definitely, there's a sense that, given the amount of, biases that we have, the fact that we can get rid of them is probably not so likely, but it's about being able to slow down and listen to when we've had a certain impact, remembering that intention isn't always the same as impact. So if someone comes to you and gives you the feedback that the way you behaved, the impact on me was whatever it was, we need to listen and learn and acknowledge, listen and learn and acknowledge and reflect and move forward differently. And just recognizing that even though our intention wasn't to do harm, it was harmful, and therefore we need to look differently. I think there are a number of things that, it sounds brilliant, and I think it's excellent, the outcomes in Stride Treglown, and it sounds exactly the kind of thing that so many places need to do. I always say that in order to be successful at implementing EDI efforts, you have to what I call stream your EDI. So that's STREAM, support, time, resource, effort, agency, and money. If you want to actually be successful at implementing your EDI efforts. So, if you're going to bring in CQ, there's some prerequisites that need to be there. So when I talk about support, that's about leadership. So again, another quote, I'm one for a quote, Stephen, I really am. But a quote that I like to use is from Gruner and Whitaker. They have a book called School Culture Rewired from 2015. And they say the culture of any organization can be shaped by the worst behaviors leaders are willing to tolerate.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think if you believe that, like I do, I think you must also conversely believe that the culture of any organization can be shaped by the best behaviors leaders are willing to demonstrate. And so when I talk about support, I mean about leadership being demonstrative and vocal about EDI in thought, behavior, and practice. And that's about recognizing diversity and valuing people intrinsically, about governing effectively and exemplifying and promoting a leadership commitment to EDI, about acting accountably, about working inclusively, communicating inclusively, advocating and championing EDI, actively influencing and promoting organizational practices and so on. So that's the support piece. But time is about, people being given the opportunity to change, and an EDI team expertise, being able to manage, being able to reflect and support comprehensively, and then resource the R stream, facilities being made available to allow for the full implementation of inclusive changes. Effort is about having that proper expertise and enough people to manage workload effectively. And if you don't have, like, if you're a small practice and you don't have an HR team, that's about, investing in bringing in the right expertise as well.
Right.
And agency is about that, senior EDI colleague having the unmediated ear of the CEO and the full influencing access across executive board decision-making leaders, whoever they might be. And if that's a small firm, again, just getting that expertise and not thinking it's everybody else's job. It really is your own. And then money. Budget expectations met, sustained, EDI work growing and developing. And I really feel when there are a lot of very small firms, sole practitioners and so on, there's a real opportunity, through networks like your own, Stephen, for people to come together and work together to get the expertise that you need as a group. It could be one of those opportunities. And I think without these prerequisites, an organization won't be successful. And, underrepresented groups and those who've been relying on you, they'll feel frustrated, despondent. To get a proper return, you need proper investment is the bottom line. And you can bring in that expertise and really believe it's the way forward, but also being really conscious about implementing those procedural changes to create the changes that you want to see in the work that you're doing. And I think that's kind of the thought process, I suppose, that underpinned your success story there, is that there was a willingness to support, to give people the time to resource it, to put in the effort.
Yeah.
People felt they had the agency. There was money involved in the investment, and people really understood why they were being asked to make the change, and leadership really bought into it, and they demonstrated those behaviours. And I can't tell you what a difference that makes.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's you hit upon so many interesting and useful nuggets there, and I think that it's really reassuring to hear as well, Marsha, that smaller architecture practices or sole practitioners is actually, I think especially with CQ, it's quite an opportunity to get it right at the start. And I think it's part of it's about being informed, isn't it? And what I wanted to ask, because obviously it's great that you've got your own consultancy, and people can reach out to you with unheard voice, that you can kind of get your teeth into a company. But if someone's in the start of their journey and they listen to a lot of the stuff that we're saying now, in terms of dipping your toes into it and feeling more familiar to get past the uncomfortableness, do you have any particular advice for people?
Well, thankfully, not so long ago, towards the end of last year, I used my 30 years of broadcasting expertise to run a radio station.
Yeah, I was quite impressed by that, actually.
Thanks so much. And if you really want to sort of dip your toe in,
yeah,
and to get some understanding of what it is that needs to be done. So I talked earlier about, what is CQ. I spoke a little bit about bias, and what Reba Radio provides you with, and that's a resource that's freely available on architecture.com,
Great.
You can go on there and there's an hour-long chat with a guy called Dr. David Livermore. He's the founder of the CQ Centre and one of the key brains behind the CQ tool. So he, literally the best person in the world to speak to about CQ. I mean, of course, apart from me. Literally wrote the book on CQ. And then Dr. Pragya Agarwal, who, again, literally wrote the book on unconscious bias called Sway. And she talked about unconscious bias. So those things that we talked about there about Timothy Wilson, 11 million pieces of information, she talks about, why it's important to understand bias. And then the rest of the output is about working through drive, knowledge, strategy, and action.
Right.
And it's very much about architecture in the built environment. So you can go in there and there are 29 episodes of good, useful. There's a thing on inclusive recruitment. There's a thing about architecture education. There's a thing about, supporting the underrepresented. There's, a thing on there about women, gender pay gap, about, reproductive health. Menopause. It's a rich content, and you can go on there and you can dip your toe and you can get some understanding of what is it that you need to be thinking about so that you can work effectively and inclusively as practitioners in the built environment. And that is, I'm so proud of the team who helped me put that together, and to be able to leave that as a legacy piece with Reba is been a true highlight of my career so far.
That was amazing, and I love the fact that you turned the bookshop into a BBC studio. Very, very cool. It worked quite well actually, and I've dipped in and out, but actually I've not heard the interview you mentioned with the doctor, so I will definitely check that out. I tell you, when you were talking, it's really interesting because obviously we've spoken about it, the benefits that can come from it from a business sense, and of course, if there are any company owners, whether you're small or large, or directors, or if you're, it helps. It would be awesome for you to go on your journey. But having said that, there's a lot of listeners I'm aware of on this podcast who maybe are students or are architects, or just going up through the ranks and kicking ass in their careers. But I would imagine, Marsha, as well, that it's not just the business owners which can help change CQ within an office setting or anything. I was wondering, would you have any advice for anyone on how to bring it up? So maybe they'd say, I've listened to this podcast and I really think we should look at CQ in the team. Would you equally say that they should check out the Reba radio that you did, which was awesome? Or is there any techniques for people who are not company owners to start getting this topic talked about in the office?
Yeah. How do you get it talked about? I mean, sometimes it's an incident that happens, and it really pulls into sharp focus how we need to do things differently. And if there's one example of that can't be denied, and that's the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah.
And I know that happened over in the States, and obviously they have a big issue, but it's not unique to the States. We have so many issues around representation that needs to be dealt with so that we can be more effective in our lives, in our world. And in terms of bringing it up, sometimes it's something that's happened to you. Sometimes it's something we witness, and we need to sort of explore, why did that happen in the first place?
Yeah, correct.
And if we can really peel back the layers of that question, why did that discrimination happen? Why do we have underrepresentation? Why does our leadership look the way it does, whether it's in our own organization or within the profession?
Yeah.
Why? And really ask that question. It's sometimes opening up that conversation, realized just looking at race over here and gender over there is not going to help us. Looking at the gender pay gap and inclusive recruitment is not going to help us. We need to look at ourselves and say, what is it about me? What is it about us that needs to change so we can do this differently?
Yeah.
Now, again, another quote for you. Einstein, I like to use this one because it's so fundamental to everything that I do. He says, you can't solve problems with the same level of consciousness that created them in the first place. And so this isn't even, I always say, this isn't even about having a blank sheet of paper. It's about not even using paper. It's about completely reframing. How do we tackle this issue? How do we tackle the issues of discrimination and underrepresentation? And so what CQ is, it's a completely different, it's a cognitive evolution. It's about thinking about things in a completely different way so we can get to a solution, a useful one. And CQ is proven, it's absolutely proven that if you are high in CQ capabilities, you act inclusively. And if a bunch of you are working together on a project or in a team, then you will approach that project inclusively. And if your organization is full of people who are practicing CQ, you will be an inclusive organization. Bottom line, all the research for the last 20 years points to that. So why wouldn't you want a piece of it?
Yeah, well said. Well said. I think it's important and it's timely right now because I think, especially from when I entered architecture, which was 2009, Marsha, gay man myself, I didn't feel comfortable, coming out and all these certain things at the time. Whereas I do think that as things have moved on and they're going in the right direction, there's still a lot of work to do, though, isn't there? It can always be better. There's always stuff to do. And I think that now, 2022, as you said, it's a good time. And actually, when you talk about George Floyd, right, it's, if anyone thinks, oh, that's a bit far away from what we do, well, Stephen Lawrence wanted to be an architect. Look what happened to him, bless him. And now I think they were called Blueprint for All, but the Stephen Lawrence Trust, I believe it was before. Amazing stuff. But that's someone that wanted to do architecture and be an architect. And can you imagine all the work that's come? So these things are really important. It's a shame, as you say, sometimes we're all guilty of it, of reacting once things have happened. Well, then, I mean, a pretty bad quote. A bad quote would be, a stitch in time saves nine, as my mum says. And I think we all got to start looking at to bring in these in beforehand rather than reacting. There's nothing worse, Marsha, especially in recruitment, of your best employee leaving because suddenly something's popped up and it doesn't fit in with certain viewpoints that they have, which were not taken accounted for. That's an economical drawback. It's a skill drawback because that skill set's walking out, but also it's a culture problem in the office because if that person was really admired, liked, people looked up to them, so many facets, you've created a problem. And in my experience, it's quite hard when the resignation letter comes, Marsha, the people change their minds. It's usually too little, too late. And what I've seen then as well is it's kind of a bit of it's usually an unlikely tactic that companies can change that quickly. I've seen it before sometimes when people hand in their resignation and companies go, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And in 3 months, if the person says that they're going to stay, in 3 months, they usually leave because it's most companies in those 3 months, they're unlikely to do those changes. So CQ and all this stuff, when we talk about EDI, it's not, you can't just put up a new page on the website and go, we're inclusive. It's like deeply, it's like, what does inclusivity means? And these values that go up to the website at the end, they need to be living and breathing and real, because otherwise someone will go on Glassdoor going, this place, da, 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 da. And you don't want to be that company. And when that review's on Glassdoor, it's kind of too late, isn't it, Marsha? So everyone should, I think, start dipping their toes in it, and just little by little. Yeah, I think it's unrealistic to say things should change in overnight, right? But you can do little bits at a time that cumulatively over a year or two make a big difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I always say there are no quick fixes. There are no magic wands. There are
Yeah.
no silver bullets. There's only conscious, deliberate action. And actually, I like to liken becoming inclusion fit to becoming physically fit.
Right.
So if, for example, you look at your statistics, your data, and it shows you that you are flabby, you are not inclusion fit at all, and you decide to start on that journey from the couch to 5K, you need to go through that process of drive, knowledge, strategy, and action. Do you want to? Do you want to get up off that couch and become fitter? And once you've motivated yourself to become fitter, what do you need to know? What are the different steps I need to take? And that's the next step. Then you have to plan. Okay, I'm going to do some crunches, or I'll try it one sit up today, and I'll try two tomorrow. And you start to build, and then you actually have to do it. You actually have to get up and go, and Monday do the crunches, and Tuesday do a 2K walk, and then start to build. But just because you did a couple of crunches doesn't mean that you're suddenly going to be ready for that 5K. That's not the way it works. It takes time to build up. And like becoming physically fit, you have to keep it up, because as soon as you stop, you regress. And so you have to keep up with the actions, the conscious, deliberate choice to go out. And it becomes easier because it becomes more of a habit. But it's always conscious. I've got to get up this morning, go to the gym, or I have to get up and do a run, or I'm not going to, sit and binge watch another 5 episodes, or, do my exercise, whatever it might be. And so it's very similar in your ability to get to a level of fitness that once you got to the 5K, the next stage, get better, 10K, next stage, half marathon. And it's the same. To reach that elite level, you need to put in the effort. But the more effort you put in, the better the results, no doubt.
Well said. I think that's a really good point to kind of get people infused, and you're right, it's an ongoing thing, and you're gonna, like everything else, you might have a little drawback, or things you're either going to get a bit of resistance. It's not going to work out perfectly at first, but you have to keep on going. What I was going to say now, Marsha, and so everyone can find you on the Unheard Voice Consultancy, which is www.unheardvoice.co.uk. So everyone can reach out to you there, and you're also on LinkedIn. But
LinkedIn, absolutely.
Yeah, if I've got you for 2 to 3 more minutes, what would be cool is you can flip the script, because I always find it that it's a one-way thing. Sometimes it can feel podcast interviews, but I like to say, if there's any questions that you'd like to ask me, and I haven't seen these questions, we haven't prepared them, but is there anything that comes to mind that you'd like to ask me about myself, the Architecture Social, or my thoughts on the architecture industry or recruitment?
Absolutely. So you and I did that session together, and you already mentioned that sort of light bulb moment you had about competitiveness, collaboration. I'd really like to know, how are you using those initial sort of CQ moments that we had together in your real life?
Good. Okay, so in a business sense, that I think the direct example was from that, is I just stopped thinking about how hard I've worked and the hours I've done and all this stuff. I stopped talking about that, and it's quite a common theme actually in the architecture industry. Of we shouldn't be proud of doing all-nighters. It's like I used to do all-nighters in architecture, studying architecture, and people would go around the studios, Marsha, the student studios, going, I've been up for 2 days, like a badge of honor. And it's like, who are we doing this for? What are we doing this for? And that kind of kill yourself to get the building done, I think is a bit toxic. And what's interesting, I would say that, but then in my professional work, especially setting up the architecture social, maybe as a point of pride in the amount of time it would take, I would go around people saying, oh, it's long hours, but I've done it. And I kind of corrected that because it didn't, when I reflected on it, it didn't sit comfortable for me. So it was like, well, it shouldn't be a positive that setting up businesses and all this stuff and how stressful they are and, almost killing yourself in the process is a good thing. And especially, I mean, the problem with me is that when I invest in something is that it's actually sometimes at the detriment of things like my health. So I was like trying to balance things in myself and realizing that maybe this point of pride that they originally had, Marsha, there's something good about being dedicated and dealing with goals, but it shouldn't be at the detriment of almost killing myself. I had a friend that said that to me. He's like, yeah, you're really impressive. A close friend. He's like, it's impressive all this stuff that you've done, but you almost kill yourself doing it. And I'm like, yeah, what was all that about? So that's the biggest one on deep introspection. That's the one that comes to mind. I think I saw a lot of little bits, but that's the one that really hit home and really challenged me because I was uncomfortable with it. Because I'd be like, so what? You have to suffer a bit to get these things done. And that was just like a weird thing that I made up to justify my behaviors. So, and then I'm very careful about talking about it with others, almost to the opposite now, when people say, I'm going to set up a business or do all this stuff. And I'm like, don't do what I do. Don't do it. I'm like, are you sure? And so I go the other way now and I play with it and I go, there is more to life than this, which challenges my own beliefs. So I hope that's the biggest one that I took away from it, Marsha,
And did you also then do the coaching elements as well with Coach M? Did you?
I did.
Yeah,
did.
okay.
Oh, I feel really like a naughty boy. Like I did it, and then I started doing I did it, and then what I felt, and I'm going to practice. I'm going to be really honest. Is that I dropped off a bit.
Okay.
And then when I started dropping off, it was exactly like you said. I was really infused. I did it. And then I did one or two coach M's. And then I got busy. I trailed off. And preparing for my 5K, I started wobbling, going back.
No. Well, I'll explain a little bit what Coach M is as well.
Yeah.
Because one of the things is you're 4 times more likely to succeed with implementing any learning if you have support to do so.
Yeah.
And so what I bring in when I do the CQ work is that coaching support. And in order to scale it, I've got this amazing partner called Lever Learning who have this unique tool called Coach M, where you end up having a coaching conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
And it helps you sustain and maintain and deliver on your goals if you attend your coaching session, Stephen. And
yeah.
And actually, again, I suppose it comes back to that physical fitness thing. If you're working with your coach, they help you to the next level. So that's kind of what the coaching piece is about. What I brought in. And we'll do with partners who want to use me out on her voice. But yeah, Stephen, it was helping up until the point you lost your.
Yeah, well, it's accountability, and I have to be accountable. That as you said, it's a conversation with yourself. And if the facilities were there, I did it, and when I did it, I felt infused because what was clever about coaching, it reminds me of what you said before. So it's like, do you remember, Steve, when you said you were going to do this? How have you got on? And then he was like, oh, yeah, I did say that. And you're right. And it reminds you of your quest. So when I did that and I engaged with it again, it was good. And I think, like everything, you're right. Then when I got distracted, I got busy, I did that thing, we all make excuses. And then I stopped having that conversation with myself. And then I didn't hold myself accountable. And then you kind of forget And I think that that's a shame. And I kind of,
It's like a public telling off.
yeah, I'm like,
Now.
yeah, but it's true though, isn't it? It's where I laugh is because I tell people on CVs and portfolios that your search have to hold yourself accountable, because if you don't, if you don't do the hard work, you don't get something out of it. And I always find it interesting, Marsha. It was like, I guess it's like the interesting thing about being human. You can say one thing, and when it comes to yourself, it can be different. Or I always say, it's people sometimes when they talk to me about CVs and portfolios, they get really embarrassed. And I go, no, don't ever get embarrassed, because you've got so much going on. And actually, my role is to look at it with these binoculars, whereas you're an architectural professional. You're not thinking about looking for jobs all the time. So it's very easy for me to give all these tips and these certain things. And I guess where I'm going with this is, while I can be an expert in that, the reality is I have the humanism and the beautiful thing and the weird and wonderful thing, and it all comes out where in that world, and where CQ is new and stuff, it really does help to have someone help you with it, but also you have to hold yourself accountable. So I do think that's why, if anyone's kind of thinking about going into CQ, especially a company, it really helps to have someone who is informed in it like yourself, because then you can kind of catch people with the coach end, but more importantly, you actually as well, Marsha, from regressing. Because when all the architecture, deadlines come in, or the project doesn't quite work, it's really easy to kind of, you forget the thing, because you're like, I do care about CQ, but the problem is, Marsha, I got a deadline, I got this and that. And then it's like, breathe, spend time in it, remember. And I think that's the benefit of having a coach. But also the coach can only coach you, but you have to be the athlete in it. You have to put a bit of an output. So yeah, full disclosure, it was good when I did it, and then I kind of fizzled off. Great act from me.
Well, good. So, well, don't worry. I think try to regain that momentum, and hopefully you'll succeed.
Well, it's never too late to do that, though, isn't it? I think that, and I have to remind myself this, because sometimes the other thing you do is you go, oh, do you know what? I think it's been so busy and I haven't done it for a while. Just whatever. And you put it off, Marsha. But actually, it should be that people can engage again at any point. So did you get anything good from Amazon there, or the post?
Actually, I've just reached for the book that I mentioned to you earlier, Timothy. Stranger to Ourselves: Discovering the Adaptive Unconscious. And if I may just take this moment to end with some quote from his book, because talk about taking personal responsibility, and definitely holding up a mirror to ourselves, and the introspective piece of work, and personal accountability. This is where he says, look, we can't necessarily trust ourselves to know ourselves. And therefore, what we have to do in order to be better at inclusivity is to actually do inclusive things. For want of a better other phrase, fake it till you make it does have some kind of resonance here. What he talks about is, instead, rather than fake it till you make it, the do good to be good principle. And he says that do good, be good principle is one of the most important lessons psychology has to offer. If you don't like something about yourself or are feeling down, it can be helpful to alter your behavior in a more positive way. To fashion a satisfying functional self-narrative, however, and to establish a desirable pattern of habitual and non-conscious responses, the best advice is to practice, practice, practice. Little steps can lead to big changes, however, and all of us have the ability to act more like the person we want to be.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marsha. I think that's the perfect note to end on. I'm going to repeat it again. People can get in touch with you on LinkedIn. That's Marsha Ramroop. You have your website of your awesome business, which is Uncured Voice. the Unheard Voice Consultancy, which is great. And there's www.unheardvoice.co.uk. Thank you, Marsha. I really appreciate you being here. I forgot to put my soundboard on, but I'm going to do a real round of applause.
Thank you.
I will end the podcast now. If you just stay in the studio for 1 second, I'd appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.